I handed Grandma a small, carefully wrapped gift, a simple handmade photo album filled with memories. It wasn't much, but it was something from the heart. My sister, Rachel, looked at it and laughed. "You're so cheap," she said, rolling her eyes. My face flushed, but I didn't say a word. I could feel her eyes on me, mocking me, as she proudly placed the expensive designer handbag she had bought for Grandma on the table. It stung, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened later, when the will was read. The lawyer cleared his throat, and then, in a quiet voice, he said something that made my hand tremble and Rachel's smirk vanish. "Everything goes to the one who never asked for anything. My name is Emma, and I'm the quiet one in my family. Not by choice, but by nature. Growing up, I was always the one in the background, never the center of attention. My sister Rachel was always front and center, getting praise, getting noticed, and I stayed quiet. I didn't mind, most of the time. I had always believed that being there for the people you love was enough, but it wasn't always easy. Take Grandma, for example. She had been in my life since I was a child. I remember the stories she used to tell me, the way she'd smile when she'd catch me listening so intently. It wasn't about grand gestures with her. It was about the little things. The time she spent with me, the advice she gave. She always seemed to understand that it wasn't what you gave, but how you gave it. Grandma's health had been declining for the past few months. We knew it, but no one really talked about it. Rachel was too busy with work, too busy with her own life. I tried to visit as often as I could. I'd help her with small tasks around the house, chat with her over tea, and listen to her stories. I didn't do it for any reward or recognition. I did it because I loved her. That day, when we gathered for her birthday, I didn't think much about the gift I had picked out for her. It wasn't much, just a photo album, but I knew Grandma would appreciate the personal touch. She loved family memories, especially the ones that weren't framed or hung on a wall, but kept close, tucked away in a book. Rachel, on the other hand, always believed in flashy gifts. She thought expensive meant better. She always went for the designer brands, the things that would catch eyes, not hearts. As we sat there, with the smell of birthday cake filling the room, I couldn't help but feel a little out of place. Rachel was the one everyone noticed, the one everyone talked about. And I was just Emma, the quiet one. But I didn't care. I wasn't after any attention. I just wanted to make Grandma happy. Then Rachel spoke up, shattering the moment. "A photo album? Seriously? What's next? A coupon for free hugs?" She laughed, and the sound stung like an insult. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, the awkward silence that followed her words. But I smiled, because Grandma was smiling, and that was all that mattered. Little did I know, that moment, that simple, heartfelt gift, would set the stage for something far bigger, something that would change everything. And it all started with the will. The family gathered in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken tension. We had all been there before, sitting in this same room, but today felt different. Grandma was no longer the vibrant woman who used to tell stories about her youth. She had become fragile, her movements slow, her voice soft. There was a sense of finality in the air, like everyone knew it was only a matter of time before things would change forever. I sat quietly, watching the others. Rachel, as always, was in her element. She was wearing a brand new designer dress, her heels clicking on the floor as she moved with the kind of confidence that made her seem untouchable. She was laughing, chatting with the relatives, making everyone feel like she was the center of attention. But that wasn't anything new. Rachel always had a way of commanding a room, making everyone gravitate toward her. And then there was me. I was sitting on the edge of the room, near the window, just out of the spotlight. I was the one who kept to myself, who listened more than I spoke. I wasn't the one who people looked to for attention or praise. I didn't mind it. I preferred it that way. But today, in the presence of my family. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was invisible. I watched as Rachel beamed with pride, knowing that all eyes were on her, and I couldn't help but feel like an outsider in my own family. We had gathered because of Grandma's declining health, and with her condition worsening, it was clear that today would be significant. But I wasn't thinking about the will, at least, not at first. I was too focused on the awkwardness in the air, the way Rachel kept flaunting her wealth and success. It wasn't just the expensive gifts she gave to Grandma that bothered me, but the way she seemed to expect admiration for it. She was the one who spent the most money on the most extravagant presents, the one who always showed off her latest achievements. But it was always in the loudest, most obvious way possible. I looked down at the photo album I had wrapped for Grandma. It wasn't much, but I knew it would mean something to her. I didn't need to spend thousands of dollars to show my love. The pictures in the album, memories of happier times we had shared, would do more to make her smile than anything Rachel could buy. But I couldn't ignore the way Rachel had looked at it, the way her eyes had narrowed as she mockingly commented, "You're so cheap." The words stung, but I didn't let them show. I smiled, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. It wasn't worth it, I told myself. But deep down, I felt the hurt, the weight of years of feeling like I wasn't enough. I wasn't the successful, polished woman. Like Rachel, I didn't have the luxury of expensive gifts, or the confidence to command attention like she did. But I didn't care. Or at least, I tried not to. The evening wore on, and the more Rachel bragged about her lavish gifts and achievements, the more I felt invisible. It wasn't about the money. It never had been, but it seemed that to everyone else, it was. The way they looked at her, the way they praised her for her success, made me feel like I was just a shadow in the background. I didn't want to compete. I didn't care about competing, but the feeling of being overlooked, of never quite measuring up, was suffocating. When the lawyer arrived to read Grandma's will, the tension in the room reached a new level. It was supposed to be a solemn occasion, a final goodbye to the matriarch of our family, but it was hard to shake the feeling that it was also about something else. Who would get what? Who would be left with what was left behind? It was the same old game, the same old rules. I didn't care about the inheritance. I never did, but I couldn't deny that, deep down, I feared the will would confirm what I had always suspected, that I was the one no one truly noticed. As the lawyer opened the envelope and began reading, I felt a lump form in my throat. Rachel sat upright, her eyes wide, as if she were already claiming victory. She was waiting for her name to be called, for the moment when she would be handed what she thought she deserved. I wasn't sure if she even noticed me, sitting there, heart pounding, wondering if the words she'd always mocked would somehow haunt me today. The will reading wasn't just about Grandma's belongings. It was about something deeper, about what Grandma had truly valued and who she had trusted. And as I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder if my quiet, humble love for her had ever been enough to matter. The room was eerily quiet as the lawyer cleared his throat. Everyone's eyes were on him, the anticipation thick in the air. Grandma's will, a piece of paper that could change everything, rested in his hands. The mood was heavy, as if the finality of the moment was too much for anyone to bear. I shifted in my seat, trying to steady my racing heart, but I couldn't seem to calm myself. This was the moment when everything would be laid bare, the moment when I'd find out if my quiet love for Grandma had been enough to matter. Rachel sat beside me, sitting straight-backed and poised. She was wearing a look of absolute confidence, as though she knew exactly what was coming. Her eyes gleamed with expectation, and her fingers drummed lightly on her lap. I could see the way she was already imagining what she would do with her share, how she would spend it, where she would travel, what new luxury she could afford next. It was always about the next thing, the next opportunity for her to prove her success. I felt a wave of frustration sweep over me. This moment, so personal, and so sacred, felt like another battleground for Rachel to claim victory. But I wasn't here for that. I didn't care about money or possessions. What mattered to me was the love Grandma had always shown me, the way she had made me feel seen when no one else did. What mattered to me was the thought of her, sitting by the window with her soft smile, reminding me of the simple truths in life. But as I looked around, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Was that enough? Was love and devotion enough to earn the recognition I was hoping for? The lawyer, after shuffling through the papers, looked up from the will and took a deep breath. The silence seemed to stretch, and I felt my palms sweat. What if Grandma had decided to leave everything to Rachel, the one who was always so sure of herself, the one who never hesitated to demand what she wanted? My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Grandma had given her the house, the savings, everything. After all, Rachel was the one who always showed up with extravagant gifts, who had the money and the status. What if I had been too quiet, too humble to ever be considered worthy? And then, the lawyer's voice broke the silence. He spoke slowly, carefully, like he was choosing his words with the utmost precision. Everything goes to the one who never asked for anything. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and my hand trembled in my lap. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and for a moment, I couldn't make sense of them. I turned to look at Rachel, who had been sitting so confidently, her eyes gleaming with pride. But now, her smirk had disappeared. She was staring at the lawyer in disbelief, her jaw hanging open as though she hadn't processed what had just been said. I couldn't believe it. The lawyer's words felt like a jolt, like a shock to my system. I looked around at the others in the room, their expressions just as stunned. No one spoke for what seemed like an eternity. The tension was unbearable. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I realized the will was not going the way I had expected. But what did that mean? As the lawyer continued to read, I let the shock wash over me. It wasn't about money, not really. It wasn't about who would walk away with more. It was about the acknowledgement that Grandma had seen me for who I truly was. She had seen the love I had given her, the quiet moments I spent with her, the way I had always tried to be there when no one else would. Grandma had always known that I didn't want anything in return for my care. I didn't need her things. I just needed her love, her presence. Rachel, on the other hand, had always expected something. She demanded attention, demanded gifts, demanded to be the center of everything. She was the one who had always asked for more, the one who felt entitled to everything she could grab hold of. And yet, despite all of that, Grandma had chosen me. It wasn't about the big gestures or the show of wealth. It was about the quiet, constant love, the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything but gives all of itself freely. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. The validation I had always longed for was finally here. But it wasn't about the inheritance. It was about knowing that in the end, it was the heart that mattered. Grandma had seen that in me. Rachel sat there, stunned, her eyes wide and unfocused. I could see the realization hitting her, but I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel like I had won. Instead, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that Grandma had understood me in a way no one else ever had. The words from the lawyer echoed in my mind, not as a victory, but as a quiet confirmation of everything I had always believed. Everything goes to the one who never asked for anything. And suddenly, in that moment, I felt like I had everything I had ever needed. The room was filled with an almost suffocating silence. It was as if time itself had stopped, holding its breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. I sat there, my heart racing, my hand still trembling in my lap. The lawyer's words still echoed in my mind, the ones that had turned everything upside down. Everything goes to the one who never asked for anything. I couldn't comprehend it. How could this be happening? Was it really me? Had Grandma left everything to me? I looked over at Rachel. She was no longer the confident woman who had been sitting so tall just moments before. Her posture had slumped, her eyes wide in disbelief. She blinked several times, as if trying to make sense of what she had just heard, but her mind seemed unable to grasp it. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She sat frozen, her hand resting on the designer handbag she had brought as a gift for Grandma, the very same bag she had flaunted earlier, as if it were a symbol of her success. But now, that success felt like a hollow shell. Rachel's pride, once so evident, seemed to evaporate in front of me. I had never seen her look so vulnerable. The mask she had so carefully crafted over the years had cracked, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction in knowing that her facade had finally come down. But the satisfaction wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. Instead, I felt a surge of emotions flood through me: relief, confusion, sadness, and oddly enough, a sense of guilt. I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't wanted the inheritance or the recognition. I had never asked for any of this. In fact, I had spent my life trying to avoid attention, preferring to quietly care for those I loved without expecting anything in return. And yet, here I was, the unexpected recipient of Grandma's legacy. I glanced around the room, the faces of my relatives etched with astonishment. No one knew how to react. My uncle, who had always been the life of the party, sat with his mouth agape, unsure of how to process the turn of events. My aunt, normally so composed, fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting between Rachel and me. Even Grandma's longtime friends, who had known her for decades, looked perplexed. And then there was Grandma's chair, the one she had sat in for as long as I could remember, now empty. I wanted to believe that she had chosen me for a reason, but I couldn't help but wonder if it was all just a mistake. Maybe Grandma hadn't realized what she was doing when she made the decision. Maybe I had been the last person she had expected to leave everything to. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't about the inheritance at all. It was about something much deeper, something that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. Rachel finally spoke, her voice low and trembling. But how? Why? The words seemed to stumble out of her, as though she were trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense at all. She was still trying to reconcile the image of the successful, polished woman she had worked so hard to become with the reality of what Grandma had chosen. And in that moment, I realized something. Rachel's entire identity had been built on external validation, the gifts, the success, the attention. She had always been the one who demanded more, who asked for recognition and praise. But I had never asked for anything. I had simply loved Grandma, quietly, consistently, without expecting a thing in return. I didn't want it, I whispered, my voice barely audible. It wasn't out of spite or resentment. It was simply the truth. I hadn't cared about the inheritance. What mattered to me was the years I had spent with Grandma, the moments we shared in silence, the way she had listened to me without judgment. It was the memories, the love that I had carried with me all these years. That was enough for me. And it always had been. But now, I had to face the reality of what this all meant. The will had been read, and my life was about to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. As I looked at Rachel, her eyes still wide with disbelief, I saw something shift in her. It wasn't anger, though. It wasn't resentment. It was a mixture of something more complicated. A recognition, perhaps, that the love she had always sought to prove through material things wasn't what had truly mattered. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about love and what it really meant to give without asking for anything in return. Rachel looked at me then, her face pale and strained. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I could see the pain in hers. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove something, trying to be enough in the eyes of others, that she hadn't realized what had always mattered most. It wasn't the wealth or the gifts. It was the quiet love, the selflessness, the way I had always been there for Grandma without ever needing to be seen. And now, I had what I hadn't asked for, what I hadn't even wanted, the recognition that had always eluded me. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won anything. All I felt was a deep, overwhelming sense of peace, knowing that, in the end, Grandma had seen me for who I truly was, and that, in itself, was worth more than anything else. The room had slowly come back to life after the lawyer finished reading the will, but the tension never quite left. Rachel was still sitting there, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. The shock hadn't worn off, and neither had the confusion. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, but I didn't look up. There was nothing more to say in that moment. What could I possibly say? The inheritance wasn't about me, and it never had been. But now, everyone knew, and Rachel knew, that Grandma had chosen me, had seen me in a way she never saw Rachel, and I could feel her hurt from across the room, even though she didn't speak. As the family began to murmur and get up, talking amongst themselves, I remained seated. I didn't feel like celebrating, nor did I feel the need to explain myself. There was nothing to explain. I had always known that love wasn't about grand gestures or fancy gifts. It was about being present, about the quiet moments that went unnoticed by others. That was what had mattered to Grandma, and it was what had mattered to me. But as I sat there in the stillness, I realized that the inheritance, though it was a huge surprise, wasn't the real gift. The real gift had been the lessons I'd learned from Grandma over the years. It was the way she had taught me to live with integrity, to act with love even when no one else was watching, to give without expectation. She had shown me that it wasn't about the things you acquired, but the relationships you built and the quiet sacrifices you made along the way. I had always been content with that, even when I felt overlooked, even when I felt like I was invisible to everyone else. I thought for a long time that it would never matter, but in that moment, it became clear. It had mattered. Grandma had seen me, had seen the heart behind my actions, and that was enough. Rachel, on the other hand, had spent her life seeking validation from others. She had built her entire identity around her achievements, her success, the material things she could afford, and the attention she could command. She had never truly understood that love couldn't be bought or earned through outward appearances. It wasn't about how much you had, but how much you gave without expecting anything in return. I could see that now, in the way Rachel sat there, still reeling from the shock. She had always assumed that her outward success would be enough, that it would be enough to make her loved, and enough to secure her place in this family. But in the end, it wasn't about what you had. It was about what you gave, what you shared with others, and how deeply you connected. Rachel's whole life had been about getting, and that was what had led her to this moment of disbelief, because for the first time, she realized that her way of living wasn't enough. As I stood up to leave the room, I noticed Rachel watching me again, this time with a different expression. It wasn't the smug, judgmental look she had always had. There was something softer in her eyes, something almost vulnerable. She hadn't said a word since the lawyer had finished reading the will, and I wasn't sure if she was going to speak now, but I felt her gaze on me. It was as if she was trying to process everything, trying to understand what had happened. I made my way to her, my heart pounding a little faster now. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew it was time. Time to break the silence. Time to let the walls down. "Rachel," I said softly, my voice steady but gentle. I never wanted any of this. I didn't need any of it. All I ever wanted was to make Grandma happy. That's what mattered to me. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. But it wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness either. It was as if she were seeing me for the first time. I didn't understand, she whispered, the words barely audible. I've spent my whole life chasing the wrong things. For the first time, I saw Rachel drop her guard. Her walls, so carefully built over the years, were starting to crumble. And in that moment, I understood. She wasn't a villain. She was someone who had lost her way, who had built her life around external validation instead of the love that really mattered. I nodded, not needing to say more. We stood there in the quiet room, surrounded by family, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that Rachel and I were on the same ground. It wasn't about the inheritance anymore. It wasn't about who had more or who had less. It was about the bond between us, the unspoken understanding that we were both learning, both growing. As I walked out of the room, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of the inheritance had lifted, but the weight of the lesson Grandma had taught me stayed with me. Love, real love, is quiet and selfless. It doesn't demand anything in return. It's about the moments that go unnoticed by others, but stay with you forever. And I knew in that moment that I had been the lucky one all along.